Standing in the dusty law office, holding a deed with my name on it, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Christine Turner, 18 years old, orphan since birth, now somehow the legal owner of 400 acres in rural Montana. The lawyer, Eric Ross, had just explained that my grandfather, Kenneth Price, had left me everything when he died 3 months ago. A grandfather I never knew existed, a ranch I'd never seen, a life I'd never imagined possible. The papers felt surreal in my grip. After 18 years in the system, bouncing between foster homes and group facilities, someone had actually wanted me. Someone had thought about me enough to leave me their entire world. I stared at the property description, trying to picture rolling hills and open sky instead of concrete walls and shared bedrooms. Eric Ross cleared his throat gently. He was a kind man in his 50s with patient eyes that had probably delivered this type of news before. Your grandfather tried to find you for years, he explained. The adoption records were sealed, and by the time he located you through a private investigator, you'd aged out of the system. He wanted to reach out directly, but he was diagnosed with cancer shortly after. He spent his final months making sure everything would transfer to you properly. I had so many questions. Why had my mother given me up? What was my grandfather like? Did I have other family? But the most pressing question was simpler. What was I supposed to do now? I'd been planning to find a job, maybe take community college classes, figure out how to survive on my own. I'd never considered that somewhere out there, someone might have been thinking about me too. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story gets incredible, and I want to know you're all following along on this journey with me. The ranch was a 6-hour drive from the city where I'd spent my entire life. Eric Ross had offered to drive me out there to see the property and meet the neighbors who'd been keeping an eye on things. I packed everything I owned into 2 garbage bags and climbed into a sedan, watching familiar streets disappear behind us. As we drove through increasingly rural landscape, he told me more about Kenneth Price. My grandfather had been a cattle rancher, well respected in the community. He'd lost his wife, my grandmother, 5 years earlier. Their only child, my mother Sarah, had left home at 17 and never returned. She died in a car accident when I was 2, which explained why I had no memories of her. Kenneth had tried to get custody of me after her death, but the system had already placed me in foster care. The legal battles dragged on for months, and by the time he might have won, I'd been adopted by a family who later returned me to the system when their circumstances changed. After that, the records became even more complicated to navigate. He never stopped looking for you, Eric said, as we passed through a small town with a single main street. He hired investigators every few years, hoping the trail would get clearer. When he finally found you last year, he was already too sick to travel, but he made sure this ranch would be yours. He said family land should stay in the family. The ranch appeared gradually as we crested a hill, spreading out below us like something from a movie. Rolling pastures stretched toward distant mountains, dotted with cattle that looked like toys from this distance. A 2-story farmhouse sat in a grove of cottonwood trees, with a red barn and several outbuildings nearby. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight with unfamiliar emotions. We pulled into the gravel driveway, and I stepped out into air that smelled completely different from the city. Cleaner somehow, with hints of grass and animals and something else I couldn't identify. The silence was overwhelming after years of institutional noise. No traffic, no shouting, no television blaring from the next room. A woman emerged from the farmhouse, wiping her hands on an apron. This was Lauren Wright, Eric explained, Kenneth's neighbor who'd been maintaining the property. She was in her 60s, with graying hair pulled back and the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work. You must be Christine, she said, and there was genuine warmth in her poisson. Your grandfather talked about you all the time. He was so proud to finally find you. I'm sorry you never got to meet him, honey. He was a good man. She invited us inside, and I followed her through rooms that felt frozen in time. The furniture was old but well-maintained, with family photos covering every surface. I stopped at a picture of a young woman who looked startlingly like me. That's your mother, Lauren said softly. Sarah. She was about your age in that photo. The house felt lived in and loved, which was foreign to me after years in institutional settings. There were quilts draped over chairs, books scattered on tables, coffee cups still in the sink. Kenneth had lived here right up until his final hospitalization, Lauren explained. He kept hoping you'd visit before he passed. She showed me through the bedrooms, including one that Kenneth had prepared specifically for me. There was a desk by the window, a bookshelf full of classic novels, and a dresser with a note on top written in shaky handwriting. For Christine, it said, "Welcome home." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry privately. The idea that someone had prepared a space for me, had imagined me living in their home, was overwhelming. I'd spent 18 years feeling temporary everywhere I went, and here was a room designed just for me by someone I'd never met. When I returned, Lauren was explaining the ranch operations to Eric. There were about 200 head of cattle currently, she said, being managed by Noah Perez, the ranch foreman who lived in a smaller house on the property. The land was good, the herd was healthy, and there was enough money in Kenneth's accounts to keep things running for several months. But Christine will need to make some decisions, Lauren continued, glancing at me with concern. Running a ranch is hard work, and it requires knowledge she probably doesn't have. Noah's a good man and he knows the operation, but ultimately she'll need to decide if she wants to keep ranching or sell the property. The idea of selling felt wrong immediately, though I couldn't explain why. This place represented the only family connection I'd ever had. Kenneth Price had thought about me enough to leave me his life's work. How could I just turn around and sell it to strangers? That evening, Lauren invited me to stay for dinner at her house next door while Eric drove back to the city. Her husband, Adam Ruiz, was a retired teacher, and they had the kind of easy, comfortable relationship I'd only seen in movies. They asked gentle questions about my background, expressing genuine outrage when I described some of my foster experiences. "You're safe now," Lauren said firmly. "Kenneth wanted you to have a real home, and that's what this is. It won't be easy learning to run a ranch, but you've got good neighbors, and Noah knows everything there is to know about cattle. If you want to try, we'll help you figure it out." That night, sleeping in my grandfather's house for the first time, I lay awake listening to sounds I'd never heard before. Wind through the trees, cattle lowing in the distance, the old house settling around me. It should have felt scary being alone in an unfamiliar place, but instead it felt peaceful in a way I'd never experienced. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows that faced east over the pastures. For a moment, I forgot where I was, expecting to see bunk beds and institutional walls. Instead, there were family photos on the nightstand and the smell of coffee drifting upstairs. Lauren had come over early to start breakfast. She called up to me, and Noah wanted to meet me before he started the morning chores. Noah Perez turned out to be a man in his 40s with the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of experience. He'd worked for Kenneth for 15 years, he told me over Lauren's pancakes, and he knew every inch of the property. He was respectful but cautious, clearly wondering what an 18-year-old city girl planned to do with a working ranch. "Your grandfather was a good boss," he said carefully. "Fair and honest. He loved this land and treated the animals right. I hope whoever ends up running things will feel the same way." I told him I wanted to learn, that I didn't plan to sell, though I admitted I knew absolutely nothing about ranching. His expression softened slightly. "It's not something you pick up overnight," he said, "but if you're serious about trying, I can teach you." Kenneth would have wanted that. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could. Noah started me with the basics: how to move through a herd without spooking the cattle, how to check fences and water systems, how to recognize signs of illness or injury in the animals. Lauren taught me about the business side: bookkeeping, feed costs, market prices, seasonal planning. It was physically demanding in a way I'd never experienced. My hands blistered from fence work, my legs ached from walking miles of pasture, and I fell into bed exhausted every night. But it was also satisfying in a way that surprised me. There was something deeply fulfilling about caring for living things, about seeing immediate results from hard work. The community acceptance came gradually. At first, people were polite but distant, clearly skeptical about the city girl who'd inherited Kenneth's ranch. But as weeks passed and they saw me working alongside Noah, learning seriously instead of just playing at ranch life, attitudes began to shift. Eugene Lopez, who ran the feed store, started offering advice about cattle nutrition. Sharon Wood, the veterinarian, began including me in her explanations when she came out for routine calls. Lisa Roberts, who owned the neighboring property, invited me to a Cattlemen's Association meeting where I was the youngest person by at least 20 years. The real test came 6 weeks after my arrival, when we had to move the herd to winter pasture. It was my first major ranch operation, and I was terrified of making a mistake that could scatter cattle across half the county. Noah positioned me at a gate, with instructions to keep it open until the last cow passed through, then close it quickly and securely. The cattle moved like a river flowing through the gate in a steady stream. I watched Noah and the other hands working their horses, guiding the herd with subtle movements that made it look effortless. When the last cow passed through, I swung the gate closed and secured the latch, feeling a surge of accomplishment that was probably disproportionate to the simple task. "Good work," Noah said, riding over with something that might have been approval in his voice. Kenneth would have been proud. That evening, Lauren brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate my first successful cattle drive. We sat on the porch as the sun set over the pastures, and she told me stories about Kenneth, how he'd built this ranch from almost nothing, working multiple bombs to buy the land piece by piece, how he'd loved my grandmother fiercely and never really recovered from losing her, how he'd talked about me constantly all after finding out I existed, planning improvements to the house and imagining teaching me to ride. He used to say the land would outlast all of us, she said, refilling my glass, but it needed someone to care for it, to understand what it meant to be rooted somewhere. He thought you might understand that, having grown up without roots of your own. As autumn turned to winter, I settled into rhythms I'd never imagined possible. Early mornings checking cattle and water systems, afternoons learning about breeding programs and market strategies, evenings reading ranch management books by the fireplace, with Kenneth's old dog sleeping at my feet. The Duanan, a border collie named Rex, had been staying with Lauren since Kenneth's death, but gradually he started spending more time at the main house, following me around the property and sleeping outside my bedroom door. Lauren said he'd chosen me, which felt like another small acceptance in a series of small acceptances. I found Kenneth's journals in his desk, detailed records of ranch operations going back decades. But more than that, they contained his thoughts about the land, the animals, the changing seasons. His love for this place came through in every entry, and reading them felt like getting to know him posthumously. One entry, dated just 2 months before his death, mentioned me specifically. "Found Christine at last," he'd written. 18 years old and aging out of the system. "Lawyer says I probably can't contact her directly because of legal complications, but at least I know she exists. At least I can make sure she has a choice about what comes next. The land needs someone who understands what it means to belong somewhere." That passage made me cry, sitting alone in his study with Rex at my feet. Kenneth had understood something about me that I was only beginning to understand myself. I'd spent 18 years feeling temporary, like I was always waiting for the next placement, the next disruption. But here, working this land he'd loved, I was beginning to feel permanent for the first time in my life. Winter brought new challenges: frozen water systems that needed constant attention, cattle that required supplemental feeding when snow covered the grass, equipment that broke down in sub-zero temperatures. But it also brought a different kind of beauty, with the pastures transformed into pristine white expanses and the mountains sharp against clear blue skies. Noah taught me to drive the tractor, to operate the hay equipment, to recognize the signs of cattle distress in harsh weather. Lauren showed me how to manage the household systems, from the propane heating to the well water pump. Adam helped me understand the financial aspects, from tax implications to insurance requirements. By spring, I felt competent in ways I'd never imagined possible. I could pregnancy check a cow, repair a urbative fence, balance the ranch books, and plan a breeding program. More importantly, I felt like I belonged somewhere for the first time in my life. The transformation wasn't just practical. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone different from the scared 18-year-old who'd stood in Eric Ross's office 8 months earlier. My hands were calloused from work, my arms strong from lifting feed bags and wrestling with fence posts. My face was tanned from long days outdoors, and there was a confidence in my posture that came from knowing I could handle whatever challenges the ranch presented. When Eric Ross visited in late spring to check on how things were going, he seemed amazed by the changes. "You look like you were born to this life," he said, watching me work with the cattle. Kenneth would be so proud to see what you've accomplished. But the real validation came from Noah, who'd been reserved and cautious during my first months. One morning as we finished vaccinating the new calves, he said quietly, "You've got good instincts with the animals, and you're not afraid of hard work. Your grandfather chose right, leaving you this place." That afternoon, I found a letter in Kenneth's desk that I'd somehow missed before. It was addressed to me, written in his careful handwriting just weeks before his death. The letter was dated 3 months before Kenneth died, and reading it felt like finally meeting the grandfather I'd never known. "Dear Christine," it began, "if you are reading this, then the lawyers found you and you've decided to come see what your old grandfather left you. I hope you'll forgive me for not reaching out while I was alive. The legal situation was complicated, and I was afraid of making things harder for you. I want you to know that finding out about you was the best thing that happened to me in the 5 years since your grandmother died. Knowing that Sarah had a daughter, that there was family still in the world, gave me a reason to keep going when I was ready to give up. I've spent the last months of my life getting this ranch ready for you. Not just the legal paperwork, but the operation itself. I've made sure the herd is healthy, the equipment is maintained, the finances are stable. I've talked to Noah about staying on to help you learn, and I've asked Lauren and Adam to keep an eye on you until you find your footing. But mostly I want you to know that this land is yours not just because I'm leaving it to you, but because you belong here. I don't know what your life has been like, but I know it probably hasn't been easy. Foster care rarely is. What I'm giving you isn't just property. It's a chance to put down roots, to build something lasting, to be part of a community that will value you for who you are and what you contribute. The ranch has been in our family for 3 generations. Your great-grandfather started with 40 acres and a handful of cattle. Your grandmother and I built it into what it is today. I always hoped your mother would want to continue the legacy, but she needed to find her own path. Now it's your turn to decide what this place becomes. If ranching isn't for you, that's okay. Sell the land to someone who will love it, take the money, and build whatever life makes you happy. But if you feel even a small connection to this place, if you can imagine yourself learning to love the land the way I have, then I hope you'll give it a chance. The work is hard, but it's honest work. The community is small, but it's genuine. The land is demanding, but it's also generous to those who understand it. You'll have bad years and good years, easy seasons and difficult ones. But you'll also have something that can't be taken away from you. You'll have a place where you belong. I wish I could have known you, Christine. I wish I could have taught you to ride, shown you the best fishing spots, told you stories about your mother when she was young. But maybe in leaving you this ranch, I'm giving you something even more valuable. I'm giving you a future that's entirely your own to shape. Welcome home, granddaughter. The land has been waiting for you. With all my love, Kenneth Price. I sat in his study, holding the letter and crying harder than I'd cried since arriving at the ranch. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of being known and valued by someone I'd never met. Kenneth had seen something in me that I was only beginning to see in myself. He'd believed I could build a life here before I'd even known this place existed. That evening, I called Eric Ross and told him I wanted to make it official. I wanted to transfer everything into my name permanently, no more estate proceedings or temporary arrangements. I was keeping the ranch, and I was staying. The next morning, I found Noah in the barn, preparing for the day's work. "I need to tell you something," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now, and I want to learn everything you can teach me about running this place properly." He smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him. "Good," he said. "Kenneth always said this land needed someone who understood what it meant to belong somewhere." I think he was right about you. Over the following months, I threw myself even deeper into ranch life. I joined the local Cattlemen's Association, started taking agricultural extension courses, and began planning improvements to the operation. I learned to ride Kenneth's horse, a patient mare named Belle who seemed to understand that she was teaching a complete beginner. By my 19th birthday, I felt like a completely different person from the scared teenager who'd aged out of the foster system a year earlier. The ranch was thriving under my ownership, with Noah as my partner rather than my teacher. We'd increased the herd size, improved the breeding program, and implemented sustainable grazing practices that were already showing results. But more than the operational success, I'd found something I'd never had before, a sense of belonging that went deeper than just having a place to live. I was part of a community that valued my contributions, part of a legacy that connected me to generations of family I'd never known existed. Lauren and Adam had become surrogate grandparents, offering advice and support without trying to control my decisions. Sharon Wood, the veterinarian, had become a mentor and friend, teaching me advanced animal husbandry techniques. Eugene Lopez at the feed store treated me like family, always making sure I got the best prices and the freshest supplies. Even the broader community had accepted me completely. At church socials and community meetings, I was introduced as Kenneth's granddaughter, the young woman who'd taken over the Price Ranch. There was pride in those introductions, as if my success reflected well on everyone who'd helped me achieve it. The financial side of the operation had stabilized and grown. What Kenneth had left me as a sustainable but modest operation, I'd expanded into something genuinely profitable. We were selling cattle at premium prices, had contracts with local restaurants for grass-fed beef, and were exploring agritourism opportunities for additional income. But the real measure of my success wasn't financial. It was the morning I woke up and realized I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. The city where I'd grown up felt like a foreign country now. The idea of apartment living, of being surrounded by concrete and strangers, seemed impossible after a year of open skies and genuine community. I'd found more than a home. I'd found an identity that felt authentic in a way nothing ever had before. I was Christine Price, rancher, community member, Kenneth's granddaughter. I belonged to this land and this community in ways that went deeper than legal ownership or temporary placement. One evening in late summer, as I sat on the porch watching the cattle graze in the golden light, Lauren joined me with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've done something remarkable here," she said. "Kenneth would be so proud of what you've accomplished. But I think what would make him happiest is seeing how you've settled into this life. You don't look like someone who's trying to prove she belongs here anymore. You look like someone who knows she's home." She was right. The desperate need to prove myself had faded into quiet confidence. I belonged here not because I'd inherited the land, but because I'd earned my place through hard work and genuine commitment to the community and the operation. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started keeping, following Kenneth's example. "Today marks 1 year since I learned about the ranch," I wrote. 1 year since I discovered that someone had been thinking about me, planning for my future, believing I could build something meaningful here. I've learned to run cattle, manage finances, maintain equipment, and navigate community relationships. But more importantly, I've learned what it feels like to belong somewhere completely, to have roots that go deeper than convenience or necessity. Kenneth was right when he wrote that he was giving me a future that was entirely my own to shape. But he gave me something even more valuable than that. He gave me the foundation to build that future on. He gave me a place where I could discover who I really was, beyond the labels and limitations of the foster system. Tomorrow I start planning for year 2 with expansion goals and improvement projects that will take this ranch into the next generation. But tonight, I'm just grateful to be here, in this place that was waiting for me long before I knew it existed. The second year brought new challenges that tested everything I'd learned. A late spring blizzard killed several calves and damaged fencing across half the property. Equipment failures during haying season threatened our winter feed supply. A fluctuation in cattle prices made financial planning more complex than anything I dealt with before. But I handled each crisis with a competence that surprised even me. I developed the kind of practical problem-solving skills that come from daily responsibility for living things in complex systems. More importantly, I'd learned to ask for help when I needed it, drawing on the community connections I'd built over the previous year. When the blizzard hit, neighbors showed up without being asked to help repair fences and move cattle to shelter. When equipment broke down, Eugene Lopez connected me with reliable repair services and helped negotiate fair prices. When market prices dropped, other ranchers shared strategies for weathering the downturn. This was what Kenneth had meant about being part of a community. It wasn't just about belonging somewhere geographically. It was about being woven into a network of mutual support and shared knowledge that made individual challenges manageable. By the end of my second year, the ranch was not only stable, but genuinely successful. We'd weathered the crisis and come out stronger, with improved systems and deeper community connections. I'd proven to myself and everyone else that my success wasn't just beginner's luck or inherited advantage. I could handle whatever challenges ranch life presented, but the real transformation was internal. I'd stopped thinking of myself as someone who'd been abandoned by her family and started thinking of myself as someone who'd been guided toward her true home. Kenneth's decision to leave me the ranch wasn't just generous. It was prescient. He'd somehow known that this life would suit me in ways I couldn't have imagined. The house had become truly mine over those 2 years. I'd redecorated Kenneth's bedroom, turning it into a space that reflected my own personality while honoring his memory. I'd added bookshelves full of agricultural texts and classic novels, hung photos of ranch life and community events, created a workspace where I could manage the business side of the operation. But I'd also preserved the elements that connected me to family history. Kenneth's study remained largely unchanged, with his journals and his desk and his favorite chair. The family photos still covered the living room walls, including new ones of me working the ranch and participating in community events. Rex had become completely my dog, following me through daily routines and sleeping at the foot of my bed. But he still showed signs of missing Kenneth, sometimes sitting by the front window as if waiting for someone who would never return. In those moments, I felt a connection to the grandfather I'd never met, united by our love for this place and this life. The community had not only accepted me, but begun to rely on my contributions. I served on the local school board, helping plan agricultural education programs. I volunteered at community events, from church fundraisers to youth rodeo competitions. I'd become someone that neighbors called for advice about cattle management and land use decisions. This was what belonging felt like, not just having a place to live, but being essential to the functioning of a community. Having people depend on your knowledge and judgment, being part of something larger than yourself while still maintaining your individual identity and goals. On quiet evenings, I often found myself thinking about the path that had brought me here. The foster homes and group facilities that had felt like punishment for existing. The aging out process that had seemed like the final abandonment. The moment in Eric Ross's office when everything changed. It was impossible to imagine my life taking any other direction now. The ranch wasn't just my home. It was my identity, my purpose, my connection to past and future generations. I was building something that would last, creating a legacy that honored Kenneth's memory while establishing my own place in the family history. 3 years after inheriting the ranch, I received a letter that changed everything again. It was from a woman named Lisa Roberts, a genealogist who'd been researching our family history. She discovered that Kenneth had a brother, Eugene Price, who'd moved to Oregon in the 1970s and lost touch with the family. Eugene had died recently, she wrote, but he'd had children who were still alive. I had cousins, actual blood relatives who'd grown up knowing about the Montana ranch and wondering what had happened to Kenneth's side of the family. The letter included contact information from my cousin, Sarah Price Martinez, a woman my age who lived in Portland. Lisa Roberts had already reached out to her, explaining about my inheritance and my successful management of the ranch. Sarah was interested in connecting, if I was open to the idea. I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling emotions I couldn't name. For 3 years, I'd built my identity around being Kenneth's sole heir, the last of the family line carrying on his legacy. The idea that there were other relatives, other people with claims to this history, felt both exciting and threatening. But when I called Sarah that evening, my fears dissolved within minutes. She was warm and funny, with a voice that sounded remarkably like mine. She'd grown up hearing stories about the Montana ranch from her father, who'd regretted losing touch with Kenneth. She'd always wondered about her uncle and whether the family land was still being worked. When I told her about inheriting the ranch and learning to run it, she was amazed and delighted. "That's incredible," she said. "Dad always said the land should stay in the family, but he thought Kenneth didn't have any children. He would be so happy to know you're there, keeping the legacy alive." We talked for hours that first night, comparing family stories and filling in gaps in each other's knowledge. Sarah had photos of her father and Kenneth as young men, working the ranch together before Eugene left for Oregon. She had letters from Kenneth to his brother, describing ranch improvements and community events from decades past. In return, I could tell her about Kenneth's final years, about the love and care he'd put into maintaining the ranch, about his search for me and his hopes for the property's future. I could share the stories Lauren and other neighbors had told me, painting a picture of the man her father had never stopped missing. Over the following months, we maintained regular contact. Sarah visited the ranch that summer, bringing her husband and two young children to see the family land. Watching her explore the property, recognizing features from her father's stories, felt like completing a circle that had been broken for decades. But more than that, having family who understood and appreciated what I'd accomplished gave me a new perspective on my own journey. Sarah marveled at my transformation from foster care survivor to successful rancher, but she also helped me see it as part of a larger family pattern of resilience and adaptation. Your great-grandfather started with nothing and built this ranch, she reminded me. Kenneth expanded it and made it profitable. Eugene left to build his own life in Oregon, but never forgot where he came from. And now you've taken it to the next level, creating something sustainable for future generations. You're not just continuing the legacy, you're adding your own chapter to it. That perspective helped me understand something important about belonging and identity. I hadn't just inherited Kenneth's ranch. I'd inherited a family tradition of hard work, land stewardship, and community involvement. My success wasn't just personal achievement. It was the continuation of values and commitments that went back generations. Sarah's children, ages 8 and 10, fell in love with the ranch immediately. They begged to stay longer, to learn to ride horses and help with cattle work. Watching them explore the property with the same wonder I'd felt 3 years earlier, I began to think about the ranch's future in new ways. This place could be a gathering point for family, a connection to heritage for children who were growing up in the city. It could be a place where future generations learned about their roots and the values that had sustained the family through different challenges and opportunities. By my 4th year on the ranch, I'd established myself as one of the most successful young ranchers in the region. The operation was profitable, sustainable, and growing. I'd been elected to the State Cattlemen's Association Board, invited to speak at agricultural conferences, and featured in farming magazines as an example of successful generational transition. But success hadn't changed my fundamental appreciation for what Kenneth had given me. Every morning, walking out to check the cattle in the early light, I felt the same gratitude I'd experienced that first week. This life, this purpose, this sense of belonging, none of it would have existed without his foresight and generosity. The house had evolved into something that honored both past and present. Kenneth's study remained a shrine to his memory, but the rest of the space reflected my own personality and needs. I'd added a modern office for managing the expanded business operations, updated the kitchen for entertaining the community connections I'd built, created guest rooms for visiting family and friends. Rex was getting older now, moving more slowly through his daily routines but still insisting on accompanying me through ranch work. He'd become a living link to Kenneth, carrying memories and habits that connected past and present. When he finally passed, it would mark the end of the last direct connection to my grandfather's daily life. But by then, I'd established my own connections that would carry forward. Noah had become more than an employee. He was a partner and mentor, someone who'd helped shape my understanding of land stewardship and animal husbandry. His knowledge and mine had merged into an approach to ranching that honored traditional methods while incorporating modern improvements. Lauren and Adam had become family in every sense that mattered. They'd guided my transition from scared teenager to confident adult, offering wisdom and support without trying to control my decisions. Their grandchildren called me Aunt Christine and spent summers learning ranch work alongside Sarah's children. The broader community had embraced me so completely that newcomers often assumed I'd grown up there. At community meetings and social events, I was introduced not as Kenneth's heir, but as Christine Price, the rancher who'd expanded the operation and contributed to local economic development. This integration felt like the ultimate validation of Kenneth's belief in me. He'd hoped I would find belonging here, and I'd exceeded even his optimistic expectations. I wasn't just surviving in this environment, I was thriving, contributing, leading. The financial success of the ranch had given me opportunities to give back to the community that had supported my growth. I'd established a scholarship fund for local students pursuing agricultural education. I'd donated land for community center expansion. I'd sponsored youth programs that taught ranch skills and land stewardship. But the most meaningful contribution was simply being an example of what was possible. Other young people in the area, including some aging out of foster care, had reached out for advice about starting their own agricultural operations. I'd become a mentor and resource, helping others find their own paths to belonging and purpose. The ranch itself had grown from Kenneth's modest but sustainable operation into something genuinely impressive. We doubled the herd size, improved the breeding program, diversified into specialty markets, and added agritourism components that brought additional income while sharing ranch life with urban visitors. But growth hadn't come at the expense of the values Kenneth had instilled in the operation. We still prioritize animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and community relationships over pure profit. The land was healthier than when I'd inherited it, the cattle were thriving, and the operation was positioned for long-term success regardless of market fluctuations. Now, 5 years after that life-changing meeting in Eric Ross's office, I can honestly say I've built something that exceeds even Kenneth's hopes for me. The ranch is not just successful but sustainable, not just profitable but purposeful. I've created a life that honors his legacy while establishing my own place in the family history. But more than professional success, I've discovered what it means to truly belong somewhere. Not just to have a place to live, but to be essential to a community's functioning. To have people who depend on your knowledge and judgment. To be part of something larger than yourself while maintaining your individual identity and goals. The scared 18-year-old who stood in that lawyer's office, holding deed papers with shaking hands, feels like a different person now. That girl was defined by what she lacked: family, stability, purpose, belonging. This woman is defined by what she's built: a thriving ranch, a strong community presence, a legacy that will continue for generations. Kenneth's letter was right about the land being generous to those who understand it, but he couldn't have known how generous this community would be to someone willing to learn and contribute. The acceptance I've found here goes deeper than tolerance or politeness. It's genuine appreciation for the work I do and the person I've become. The family connections I've built with Sarah and her children have added another dimension to my sense of belonging. Knowing that there are blood relatives who understand and value what I've accomplished gives weight to my achievements that goes beyond personal satisfaction. I'm not just building something for myself. I'm continuing a family tradition that connects past and future. Looking toward the next 5 years, I see opportunities for continued growth and contribution. The ranch can expand further. The community involvement can deepen. The family connections can strengthen. But the foundation is solid now. I know who I am and where I belong in ways that seemed impossible during those years in the foster system. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Kenneth hadn't found me, if the inheritance had gone to distant relatives or charitable organizations. Would I have found my way to this kind of life through other paths? Would I have discovered this capacity for land stewardship and community leadership in different circumstances? But those questions feel academic now. This is the life I have, the identity I've built, the future I'm creating. Kenneth gave me the opportunity, but I did the work of becoming someone worthy of his faith in me. The transformation from abandoned child to successful rancher wasn't automatic. It required daily choices to learn, grow, contribute, and commit. The ranch has taught me that belonging isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create through consistent actions that demonstrate your investment in a place and community. You earn belonging by proving that you understand what's at stake and that you're willing to do the work of maintaining and improving what you've inherited. As I write this, sitting in Kenneth's study with Rex sleeping at my feet and the sound of cattle settling for the night outside the window, I feel a contentment that would have been unimaginable 5 years ago. This is home in the deepest sense of the word, not just a place where I live, but a place where I belong completely and permanently. The story doesn't end with my personal transformation, though. It continues with the ripple effects of what Kenneth started when he decided to leave his ranch to a granddaughter he'd never met. His act of faith in my potential has created something larger than either of us could have imagined. The scholarship fund I established has helped 12 local students pursue agricultural education, with 3 of them returning to start their own operations in the area. The youth programs I sponsor have introduced dozens of children to ranch work and land stewardship, creating a new generation that understands and values rural life. The ranch itself has become a model for sustainable operations that other producers study and emulate. The agritourism components bring urban visitors who leave with deeper appreciation for agricultural work and rural communities. The specialty beef program has created market opportunities for other local ranchers. But perhaps most importantly, my story has become proof that family isn't just about blood relations or traditional structures. It's about people who choose to invest in each other's futures, who create opportunities for growth and belonging, who build something together that's larger than what any individual could achieve alone. Kenneth chose to believe in me before he knew anything about my character or capabilities. Lauren and Adam chose to guide and support my growth without trying to control my decisions. Noah chose to share his knowledge and expertise, treating me as a partner rather than just an inheritor. Sarah chose to embrace me as family, connecting me to a heritage I'd never known existed. Each of these choices created possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Together, they transformed not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to this ranch and this community. Kenneth's decision to leave me his land started a chain reaction of belonging and purpose that continues to expand. 5 years later, I understand that inheritance isn't just about receiving something from the past. It's about accepting responsibility for carrying something forward into the future. Kenneth didn't just give me a ranch. He gave me the opportunity to become someone who could preserve and expand what he'd built. The 18-year-old who aged out of foster care with 2 garbage bags of possessions couldn't have imagined owning 400 acres of Montana rangeland. But more than that, she couldn't have imagined being the kind of person who could manage that responsibility successfully. The transformation required wasn't just external, it was fundamental, changing not just what I did, but who I was. Now, when I meet other young people aging out of the system, I try to share what I've learned about possibility and belonging. Not everyone will inherit a ranch, obviously, but everyone has the potential to build something meaningful if they're willing to do the work and accept the support that's available. The key is recognizing that belonging isn't about finding the perfect place or the perfect family. It's about choosing to invest yourself fully in whatever opportunities present themselves, trusting that commitment and hard work can create the connections and purpose you're seeking. Kenneth's Ranch taught me that home isn't something you find. It's something you build day by day through choices that demonstrate your commitment to a place and the people who share it with you. The land was here before me and will be here after me, but what I do with my time as its steward will determine what it becomes for future generations. So if you're watching this and feeling lost or disconnected, know that your story isn't finished yet. There are people out there who might see potential in you that you don't see in yourself. There are opportunities waiting that you can't imagine yet. There are communities that need exactly what you have to offer, even if you don't know what that is yet. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what this story means to you. Have you ever experienced an unexpected opportunity that changed your life completely? Do you believe that family is about more than blood relations? What does belonging mean to you? And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need reminders that our stories aren't finished, that there are possibilities we haven't considered, that someone out there might be waiting to offer us exactly what we need to build the life we're meant to live. The ranch is still here, still thriving, still teaching me new things about responsibility and belonging and the kind of legacy worth leaving. Kenneth's faith in me created something beautiful and lasting, and I'm committed to making sure that gift keeps growing for generations to come. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that yours is still being written too.